Thanks, Amy. So again, welcome to the Portland Utility Board. And the Portland Utility Board is a meeting of volunteer board members established to review and oversee procedures for the Portland Water Bureau and the Bureau of Environmental Services. Under Portland City Code and state law, the Portland Utility Board is holding this meeting electronically. Board members and relevant city staff are attending remotely, electronically or by phone, and the city has made it available to the public to listen in to the audio broadcast of this meeting, and the meeting is being recorded. The public will have an opportunity to provide comments during the public comment portion of the agenda and can provide written testimony by sending an email to the board at utilityboard@portlandoregon.gov. PUB believes and acts on anti-racist principles in our meeting spaces and interactions within PUB. While every person has the right to share their personal perspective, we stand against wrongful conduct, and particularly any conduct that is targeted toward people that are made vulnerable by systemic inequities. So this means stepping up as a community when there is wrongful conduct and fostering a space of learning and growth. We put these principles into action by speaking up and speaking out. Each one of us is empowered to maintain the culture of the Portland Utility Board. And when we do so, we will focus on the impacted individual or population, condemning conduct, but not people. Amy will review our guidelines.
Thank you, Karen. This is Amy Archer-Masters, and I will quickly review the guidelines. Please state your name before you speak, and if appropriate, the name of the person you are addressing or that you're addressing the group. The chat box is only viewable by the hosts, which are both the PUB staff. So please limit to technical and logistic issues, including signing up for public comment, to ask for technical assistance, to remind us that you have been waiting to speak. The raise hand function is primarily used by the board. Co-hosts may lower your hand once you've begun speaking, just to maintain the flow of the conversation. During public comment periods, the public can raise their hand and you'll be called on when appropriate. If connecting by phone, please press *9 to raise your hand. Videos may be turned on for the board, presenters, and facilitators when speaking, if desired, not required. Members of the public and others should leave videos off. Please mute your microphone when you're not speaking. Members of the public will be muted except when giving public comment. If using a phone, please press *6 to mute or unmute yourself. Public comment will be taken during the comment period early in the meeting. Sign up through the chat with PUB staff or raise your hand during comment period. It's also available just prior to any formal board vote after a motion has been made and seconded by board members. As mentioned, the meeting is being recorded. We'll pass it back to you, Karen.
All right, let's take a quick look at our agenda. We do now have quorum, so I can officially call the meeting to order and we can conduct business. We'll first have our usual disclosure of communications and take a quick look at our minutes and then move into public comment. And then the bulk of the meeting is going to be devoted to our budget season preview and preparation, essentially continuing where we left off at our last meeting. And we have a few announcements and we'll take a quick look at what our December 16th agenda will look like before we adjourn. So let us move into disclosure of communications, and anyone who has communications to disclose, please raise your hand and speak up. Alex, please go ahead.
Thanks, Karen. Alex Lopez, voting member. And yes, I like always had at least 1 or 2 meetings with BES staff in the last few weeks. Jessica Terlikowski, I believe, was the only staff member at this point.
Thank you, Alex. Anyone else? All right, very good. Thank you. And I'm sorry, Tom, go ahead.
Sorry, I was kind of slow there. I had communication with some BES staff and Water Bureau staff in the last couple weeks.
Thank you, Tom. Do you want to give a 1 or 2 sentence description of the nature of the communications?
Yes, I had called the Water Bureau about a property and their stormwater fees, and Water Bureau couldn't answer my question, and I was transferred to BES, and they answered my question, and then since I was communicating, I had another question, and they said they would have to get back to me.
Okay, great.
Thank
Thanks. Thanks for that additional detail. Alrighty, I believe we have a couple sets of minutes. November, oh, I'm sorry, we're going to do public comment next. Okay, very good. Anyone wishing to make public comment?
Hi, Karen, this is Amy, and I do have one person who signed up for public comment, but their mic and speakers are not working. And so they provided it to me and asked that I read it on their behalf. So I will share that. It is, they are signed on, it is LJ. And so I will just read their comment. Water Director Solmer, first, when do you plan to alert the public with robust, meaningful statements about the Water Bureau's lead action level exceedance 1 week ago? We urge you to avoid the usual misleading messaging that has given residents here a false sense of security for far too long. Secondly, in light of this exceedance, will PWB swiftly provide free filters certified to reduce lead to anyone who asks for them, like other cities nationwide are doing after similar exceedances? This is the best way to prevent lead in water exposure. Thank you. And that is the only public comment that I had requested.
I didn't receive any requests.
Very good. And I am not seeing hands raised on the participant list. So that concludes our public comment period. Thank you. And now we have 2 sets of minutes from November 2nd and November 18th. Thank you, Eliza, for sending those ahead of time for us to review. Are there any changes or additions or concerns about the documentation of our minutes from the November 2nd and November 18th meetings? Seeing no hands and hearing no one unmuting, those minutes can be considered official. Thank you. All right, so we have a few, and now that I am looking at this topic, I don't believe I properly announced the agenda. So sorry, before we move into budget work, we're going to take about 10 minutes, and Eliza is going to walk us through the feedback that she received from you all, both in the meeting verbally that we had last month about improving our public, our meeting processes, or maybe not improving, but looking at doing business perhaps a little bit more efficiently, or perhaps more in depth. And you all had some great ideas for how we do that. And Eliza also received some feedback via email. So thanks, folks, for sending your ideas. And Eliza's, since she compiled all the information, is most familiar with how it chunks out, and she's just going to walk us through this. So we'll give Eliza some space to do that. And for pub members, be thinking about, is anything missing? I mean, does this structure give us a good plan forward for improving our meeting processes?
So the words are not working for me today, so we'll see how well I do. This same table was what I sent to you all as read ahead, and mostly there was a lot of agreement on a lot of the ideas that came out of the meeting on November 18th. So one of the key themes was to maintain the presentations, shorten them where possible, and get a better balance of discussion time and presentation time. And then there was agreement, I think a reaffirmation of what you had in your work plan, which is that you want to be able to move and adjust your priorities when issues that intersect with pub themes and values emerge that you can actually have impact on. So sort of being a little bit flexible and nimble in your work plan. And then there was the next item is where the topic in the pub schedule allows for it to work on the topic until it's complete, whether that takes one or more meetings. And I think that is that has come out a couple times, and I think it's a really good idea, and it's going to take some finesse to make happen, and maybe sort of a braiding of topics, because some of the topics you all are dealing with are so big that the bureaus work on it. A company spans several months, even a year, right? But how do we keep those topics that are really key to you sort of braided into your ongoing work whenever possible? And then there was the limiting your meeting topics to one main topic wherever possible, with a brief amount of time for just announcements and brief items, and then not going above 2 main topics. And that's all I can see on my screen. If you can scroll up, where am I now? Thank you. And then there was general agreement to sort of use the recent debt collection discussion as a model of how to sort of move these complicated topics forward. So doing some individual between meeting work, coming back to discuss it and make the actual decisions. And there was a request that when we have dense read aheads that we try to get a brief synopsis, which seems like a really great idea. And then there was actually a lot of agreement on sharing this living work plan the way I just shared it just now at a couple touch points throughout the year. So we can try that out. And then on the rest of the items, there was not a lot of agreement. There was some neutrals, there were some dislikes, and there were some likes. And so what I summarize for you all, and then I let you all open it up for discussion, is that we move forward with everything you liked, see where that lands us in a couple months, and fine tune as we need.
Thank you, Eliza. Great walkthrough. I think your words were perfect. So for us all, we all, you all, how do you feel about that as a plan moving forward? If we, and maybe Amy, if you could slide scroll a little bit back. Yeah, thank you. Up to those topics that there seem to be, you know, multiple folks that thought that was a good idea. So, you know, I can just speak as a co-chair and say I will keep this list handy for sure. And in any discussions that I'm having with Kaliska, my co-chair, and with Eliza and Amy, as we're, you know, kind of scoping out how to distribute all the many topics that we are responsible for across the meetings that we have, I'll certainly be keeping this handy, and we'll ask you all to keep us honest. And, you know, we'll do a little bit of kind of mutual accountability. And I think spending a little more, easier said than done. But, you know, usually we close our meetings and we have like 30 seconds to say, okay, what's on the agenda for next meeting? If we, again, try and use some self-accountability to make sure we're not rushing at the end of the meeting, and we actually have a good solid few minutes for us to look at what's on the agenda for the next meeting, keep in mind some of these practices, and, you know, speak honestly about that's not going to work. We can't handle those two really dense topics in one meeting, or whatever the case may be. So let me pause, make some space, look to see if anyone has some feedback on this, any comments or anything you would like to add for us all to consider about meeting process and structure. Tom, please go ahead.
I can just barely see the top there. It looks like it says total. Oh, so four of us responded. So aren't there 11 or 12 of us on the voting members?
Fair, yeah, yes,
Okay.
well, there's 11 of us. So
Okay.
great point. Maybe the number of folks that responded by email may not be huge, but the list of all the topics was compiled from things that we all verbalized at was it meeting before last, where we had a kind of longer discussion about ways that we can improve meeting process. But your point is valid, absolutely, Tom, that 4 out of 11 people are sort of represented on this chart that Eliza made.
So could others still submit their response to the survey, or are we done?
Let's see. Well, sure, why not? I mean, I think that this isn't. I didn't view this as a kind of one and done, and this is your last opportunity. I think suggestions about how we improve the way we do business are always welcome. So certainly, yeah, I think, Tom, if you hadn't had a chance to get your vote in, that
I'm
would,
one of the 4.
what's that?
I'm one of the 4.
Oh, you're one of the 4. Yeah, right. I mean, I think something that might be, rather than, maybe folks didn't vote because they thought things were fine.
It could be
necessarily really
basically neutral, right?
need to change anything, or didn't have time or whatever. But I guess just for today, and in the few minutes we have today, I'd like to hear if there's, for those of us that are here right now, if there's anything kind of glaringly missing that we should be trying, and that you really want to put forward. Maybe you're one of the 1 votes down there, and you really want to elevate that as something that we should try. I guess that's what I'd like to hear from folks today. But yeah, we can, like I said, circle back, keep holding each other accountable, and try and, I would say, at a minimum, employ these top few practices that there seemed to be at least multiple people thought were a good idea. Karen Spencer, hello, welcome.
Hi, thank you. So I did not add additional comments by email because I felt like our conversation at the meeting adequately captured my sentiments. So I am one of the folks who did not add anything on there. Something that you said, Karen, it kind of spurred me in thinking, as you're talking about mutual accountability. I noticed that there was a suggestion of lengthening the meeting, which would be pretty tough for me to do already, given everything else that's going on. But I think that we could talk about length of comments. Of course, there's some people who process by talking out loud. And if you are one of those people, I completely understand, because I am also one of those people, trying to keep comments short, and then also utilizing the ditto. I've done that on other boards. So the person may have a different take than you have, or a slightly different nuanced point. But if you feel like it's not going to add too much more, ditto works really well, and that might help keep the conversations moving.
Thanks a lot, Karen. Great suggestion. Always something to strive for. Why am I speaking? Why am I not speaking? Has this been said? Do I have a different perspective? Those kinds of questions that we can certainly all ask ourselves. So thank you for that addition. Any other words of guidance or suggestions from our board? All right, well, thanks. Oh, Alex, please go ahead. Yeah.
Thanks, Alex Lopez here. Yeah, I just wanted to kind of note that, I mean, I guess except for the very first item on there, and I believe I voted for all of those. These really speak to what I think is one of the more important themes of this is just providing room to adjust if things change. As if we've learned anything over the past few years, is that things, conditions, outside conditions change often and sometimes significantly. So just having a little bit of room in our work. I know there are some things that we're required to do, but leaving a little bit of wiggle room in there to address issues as they come up. And I think those less ambitious meeting agendas, moving and adjusting priorities. I think all of that really speaks to leaving some breathing room there.
All right. The idea of quality over quantity. One topic covered really well and thoroughly versus 3 topics that we have to kind of rush through. All right, well, thanks everyone. Let's like I said, hold ourselves accountable and give each other some space and graciousness, but at the same time, we can respectfully, remind each other, speak up if we are thinking that we're straying away from some of these improvements that we'd like to make to our meetings. And please continue to hold your co-chairs accountable as well, because that's part of our job, is trying to facilitate and get our business done, but make sure that everyone is heard, has the space to be heard, and has plenty of time to process and ask questions and that kind of thing. All right. What are we doing on time? Ooh, 1 minute, not too bad. And I believe we're going to put Eliza on the spot again for a few minutes. Again, this was information that Eliza sent us ahead to read through, but how about a quick summary again, based on the feedback that Eliza received in between meetings on taking a look at our work plan that we went through last, what season is it now? Winter. So summer, fall, early fall, and where we broke things into sort of 3 levels of priorities, kind of based on what stuff do we have to do? What is this board responsible for reviewing and opining and making recommendations on? And where are timely places for considering, where are the timeliest places for PUB to provide input? And when are our recommendations going to be the most meaningful and impactful and actionable in whatever the business item is regarding BES or Portland Water Bureau. So with all that in mind, we ask you all to kind of take a look at that work plan again. And Eliza, if you could walk us through what the outcome was.
So this again is a shorter version of what I sent ahead and read ahead, shorter so that the font could be larger primarily. So it seemed like most of the top priorities stayed top priorities, and the ones that got the most comment was the hiring, retention, and promotion of BIPOC staff remained a very high priority. And I've just given you in that work doc, the status update is that there's an initial round of information and data from both bureaus is expected in a few weeks. And so I think the plan will be to share that initial data via email, maybe collect some individual thoughts and questions, sort of kind of doing what we did with the debt recovery, sort of prepping for a board conversation by doing some initial individual work on the topic. The next thing that did rise up was a suggestion to move the lead topic to level 1, and to also include in that discussion, because lead is a multifaceted topic, was to include discussion of the lead hazard reduction program. as well as the idea that Julia had shared, which is the possibility of assistance for lead pipe fixture replacement for low income households. And the idea would be that you might be looking at those two things because they are actionable now. They're not actionable for the two bureaus. They aren't something that the bureaus would be able to fund in coming years, but they are things that you might want to apprise council of. So that was one of the outcomes from that. And then the other items, the next three items, there was a lot of requests for additional information, and I just posed, and this again went back out to you as Rita had, that in the interest of maintaining one topic per meeting and managing the meeting time, we might collect some initial information from the bureaus and share that out via email. And then as individuals, you could bring to the board, I really think we need to discuss X in the meeting after reading this information. And so that would include the one I called out because it was kind of a new topic as opposed to one of the current topics on your work plan was Water Bureau's plans to update meters. There was a couple of people that are interested in having some initial information about that. And then the last takeaway is that we did get a request from Tom to have about 10 minutes at a meeting, at an upcoming soonish meeting, to just have an internal to the board discussion about BES's current stormwater fee methodology for single family residential properties. That's an area Tom's done some work on, and he wanted to share with you all and get some thoughts from you. So that was those were the main takeaways. And I think I'm turning it over to Karen or opening it up to the board. Do you see any, are you in agreement with that those things kind of reflect where you're heading?
Thanks, Eliza. So yes, again, to putting this out there for the board's, what's the word, sort of ground truthing. I mean, pretty complicated conversation we had. More than one conversation about how we try and get a lot done in a short amount of time, and how we prioritize items. And again, that idea of when is our input going to be the most impactful. So given the complexity of that and the time you've had to think about it, does this summary that Eliza put together look right?
There's one bullet point that I didn't put on there. Like, it's always clear to me, but then it's clear as mud to everybody else. I think I said it verbally, but it was that your other top level priorities, nobody suggested really dropping the number ones down. So I didn't relist them here for that reason.
Well, let me, if I may, dig a little deeper on some of the additions of items. And perhaps, Tom, if you would be willing to share your thoughts on timing for when it would be appropriate. I mean, anytime's appropriate, but when you would like to have the board discuss and consider the information you bring us on the residential stormwater fees.
Well, the purpose of providing the information that I've been gathering is to there's an assumption I have that perhaps other voting members and ex officios perhaps don't know that much about the issue. And so the idea, and especially since BES is currently doing a rate study, and we're going to get information on that sometime in the future, I don't know when, but I thought it'd be good for us to have a discussion about the single family rate, because personally, I believe that it's inequitable. And I think when BES came to us with their consultant a few months ago, they alluded to that. And so understanding what it is and discussing, well, what could it be, or what might BES, what maybe, anyway, just so that we have some grounding in this issue a little bit more than a presentation by BES. We could even revisit that presentation and look at information that they already gave us just so that we could discuss it and have some basis to be prepared for when they come back, so that we can better understand and better make decisions about what we're seeing from BES, based more on having some of the information about how it currently works, or potentially how it currently has flaws or doesn't work too well. So, and of course, over the course of time, there have been some things prior to me coming on the board. I think BES discontinued its charging of rates on houseboats. And so there's some question as to the methodology as well, in the terms of, well, if a houseboat doesn't have to pay, what about a house that has a stormwater sump, which all the water goes in the ground, versus if you have a houseboat, all the water goes in the water? Is there really any difference technically between the two? And just having an idea of, there are technical issues, and then there are issues that are, I don't know, maybe policy is a word. But anyway, that's the idea, is to have an idea, to present the information, have a chance for everybody to look at it, bounce it around, and then hopefully we all have a little more knowledge in preparation for when we do meet with BES in the future.
Excellent. That was really helpful. Thank you for that. Let's see. Let's see. Yeah, I don't think I need to say any more. I'm just gonna, again, open it up to our members to, again, opine. If you were one of the folks that thought things needed to be rejiggered on our work plan, is there anything more you'd like to say about how it kind of fell out in the summary? Or we can live with this and charge ahead. Okay, I will take that we can live with this, and let's charge ahead. And again, co-chairs will definitely keep this handy as we're, again, charting out and talking with staff about how we chart out meeting topics in the next 6 months here. So thanks everyone for putting your thoughts down on paper. I think we're ready for our budget.
All right.
Yeah, Amy Archer Masters is going to pick up where she left off at our last meeting and try and get a little bit of feedback from new folks, as well as folks that have been through a couple of budgets so far.
Thank you, Karen. Okay, so I know we were a little rushed at the last meeting. So this last bit, again, is just kind of a refresher. I won't spend a lot of time talking about it, but just give you some framing of the types of materials that will be coming at you soon. And there are lots of prior year information that are available on the website. And again, as Tom mentioned at the last meeting, as materials are coming out, if it's easier for you to review materials in hard copy, that's something that we can certainly make available to you. The size of the documents are pretty large. As noted here, the requested budget documents are per bureau kind of range probably to about 200 to 270 pages per bureau. So it's a lot of materials to read through. That includes summaries for the Bureau as a whole, performance measures for each of the program areas, program offer summary documents for each of their program areas. BES has 16 program areas. The Water Bureau has 23 equity assessments and equity reviews for each of those program areas as well. Their capital improvement plans, as well as their 5-year financial plans. You also obviously have access to program and policy information and presentations that you've received throughout the year. You'll have opportunity to ask questions of the bureaus, both during meetings and in between meetings. We do a lot of gathering questions from you and feeding those to the bureaus and gathering information and getting that information back to you over the next several months to try to help feed information to you to help form your recommendations to council. And then you'll also receive information on the analyses that come from the city budget office. Reminder that the goal is obviously to keep the scope of work that the bureaus cover is so broad. So the range of questions that you could ask is really wide. During this period of time, since it's budget development season, we try to stay focused on the policy areas that you're interested in and how it relates to the budget development. So the questions and answers that we're having the bureaus respond to, we focus on the quick turnaround on those that will help feed into your recommendation process. And so some of those questions that have longer term implications might take a little more time to get responses to, but that's where the focus is during this period of time, just to manage the volume of the work. Because this period of time is so intense, because you're really reviewing a lot of information, the former pub members were kind of struggling with feeling like there was a lot of information to cover. A lot of time was spent on budget discussions where there was, a question of how much impact was being had on the level of detail of the budgets that were being reviewed, and more time. There was interest in spending more time on diving deeper into broader policy issues and program issues before budget decisions were being made. And so there was a shift made a few years back on how they approached the budget discussions. And so for the past several years, the pub changed their approach to identifying a few priority program areas for each bureau and using the meetings over these couple months to dive deeper into those identified priority areas. As identified on this slide, the goals were to try to maximize the meeting time during these couple months, to ask the bureaus to focus any presentations and discussions on the areas that were the highest importance to the pub. And as I mentioned, to have the inquiry and follow-up kind of focus on those areas, and as much as possible, really focus the discussions on the areas that connected to your priorities and your work plan goals. So part of the intent in bringing this to you today, and as we've done over the past several years, is to start the conversation just with kind of a review of what we've done in those prior years and get some feedback on that process and how it's worked. Before we get into that, though, I want to just show you briefly some of those materials that I just talked about. So before we get into this, let me just share some examples of the types of information that you'll be seeing. So bear with me for just a moment while I pull up the documents. So many files open. So just to give you a sense of the documents, the program offer materials that the bureaus are in the process of developing over the current months, December and January. For each program offer area that I mentioned for the bureaus, for example, this was one of the areas that last year PUB had prioritized. This specific one is for the Bureau of Environmental Services, their strategy area. This is one of the written documents that at a pretty high level summarizes the general program area. It gives some summary information about the performance measures for that program area. It provides some description of the types of services that fall into that program offer area, and then goes into some summary of the equity impacts and how it ties into their equity plan. Maybe a little bit about specifically, what the impacts are during that particular year or how it broadly connects, depending on that specific program area. It can range. There's a section on the changes to that program offer area. So that's some of where if there are any significant changes that are happening within the program offer area in the Bureau that year, it will talk specifically to that. So that could be budget changes, it could be organizational changes, it could be some staffing changes. Sometimes there may not be any significant changes if the program is staying pretty consistent, but this is where it would summarize some of that. There is a summary of, at a high level, what the budget is for the program offer area for BES. For those of you who are newer, you may have heard, them talk about the reorganization that took place. Their program offer areas were different in prior years, so that's why these actuals are empty in the earlier years. That's because their offer areas changed. So this looks different. In Water Bureau, you'll see those populated. This was one of the first years, so that's why these look different in this one. But typically, you'll see the prior years as well as what's being requested in the current year. And then in this final section, you'll see some details specifically with some narrative about the budget, both where the revenues come from, some summary of what the expenses and how it connects to the services that are provided, and then some detail about the staffing and the types of positions that fall within this program offer area, the assets that are connected to this work, and then some program contact information and website contact information as well. So for each program offer area, this is part of what makes up the larger document for the Bureau. And so when the bureaus are coming to present information to PUB, this is some of the documents that probably by late January you'll have available to you. And if you have prioritized the strategy area, this is something that you would dive more deeply into. What we did in prior years in order to identify what the priority areas were, is that we asked the bureaus to provide some very high level information about each of the program offer areas. And this will be a little hard to read, so don't worry about the details that are provided here, but I'm just providing an overview to give you a sense of what you would have to look at. And it's really just a very high level summary information, including kind of a title of what the program offer area is. For example, this right here is the strategy area, a high level summary information that's kind of taken from that summary document that they have. If there's performance measures for that area, just the description of what those performance measures are, how many staff there are, at a high level what the approximate budget is. These next sections are from the Bureau's perspective. We use these, the pub asked them to kind of estimate from the Bureau's perspective whether there were significant changes that were anticipated to the program offer area, so that they could flag whether there was a reason from the Bureau's perspective that it should be flagged. For example, in this area, the strategy program offer area, there was, some community engagement for the rate study related to Portland Harbor that was anticipated. And so the Bureau flagged that so that the pub could take into consideration whether that was a basis that maybe they would want to prioritize that in that year. And then a short description of what those anticipated changes were. And so this was provided to each of the pub members so that you would have just some very high level information about each of the program areas, so that you could kind of evaluate what each of those program areas were and flag which of those areas you were most interested in diving deeper into during the meeting time in the coming months. So what we did in prior years is, as pub staff, I did a survey of each of you individually, and asked for your top 3 priorities, and then compiled that information to see where there were commonalities, and then brought that back to the pub to see if there was general consensus. And I think in prior years kind of ranged, and generally we came up with 4 or 5 per bureau that were identified as priorities. And those were kind of the areas that for the meeting time that we spent meeting time focusing presentations and discussion time on and diving into for Q&A. Now, that didn't necessarily mean that if you had questions about other program areas, that those were off the table. I mean, any areas or questions that were relevant and might tie to recommendations or concepts that pub wanted to discuss could certainly be explored. But that just provided a way to focus the discussion. So I'd like to kind of hear some feedback on that, particularly from folks initially who have participated in prior years, to hear whether that worked well, whether there were any suggestions for improvement or negative feedback about that process, ideas for a different approach, information that you want to make sure is provided differently, and just generally get a sense of whether that's an approach that people are interested in, or so I guess I'll pass it back to Karen and the group for open discussion on it.
Thanks, Amy. Great priming for the conversation. It was really helpful to have, I know, my memory refreshed by looking at, oh yeah, that's what a program offer looks like. So that was really helpful. Thank you. All right, so board members, let's think about the first question about whether or not you think it is wise or perhaps necessary, I'll say necessary or wise, to start by narrowing in on a relatively small number of topics that we're going to commit to going deep on. Oops, sorry, pardon me. I'm going to go on mute and let folks have at it about that prioritization. What do you think? And especially, I mean, not only, but especially folks that have been through a budget or two. What do you think that's that's that we absolutely, in order to get our business done, we have to do prioritization, or can we just kind of popcorn on things that board members find worthy and necessary to discuss?
Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, I'll just say this. So I've been through one budget review, and just it's a really big job. And I'm one of those that prefer to have the written material. But in terms of prioritization, what I found in looking at how much there is to look at, that for some of us, we just may not have time, or we just have to prioritize things. And I think that just is how it has to be. But if, in my case, if I do have time to review more than what the priorities are, I will do that. And if something comes to me that looks important to bring up, I will bring it up, and then we can all talk about it and see if we want to look at that. So that's one of the things I'm thinking for this round of budget review. I'm also wondering, and I don't know if this is the right place to put it, but I was recently, we were talking about climate change, or I was in some different venues talking about it. And what I thought might be helpful in the budget process is if the bureaus had a column that could indicate, and I don't know how the bureaus are structured to work on the city's climate agenda or a climate plan, but I think it would be helpful to know how they are. And this could be a place to put it, where there's a column that says, does this particular budget item address climate issues either by maintaining the status quo or helping to reduce the carbon footprint of the Bureau, or something like that. So I don't know that they could do it for this particular budget session, but it's something that I thought might be helpful for all of us to have a better understanding of how the bureaus are looking at their part in the the city's climate plan. Anyway, that's I think that's all I have.
Thanks, Tom. It's great. Let's see, Gabby, you had your hand up. I don't see it anymore. Did you have something to add there?
Yeah, I just want to ditto what Tom had just said. And I was just thinking through, because there's so much going on, I was wondering in terms of like how to approach it, where we can all see like the questions that we all have. I think like as you're reading all their priorities, and a lot of questions come up. So I'm wondering how we could facilitate that. Like, okay, we have a lot of questions on that as part of guiding the conversations that we have. I do like the prioritization because, as Tom said, I don't think you have time for everything, but I'm wondering if even within that, there's some questions that we can either be compiled, or that we could reach out to the Bureau directly and maybe get some of those answers without, like, for things that are not in our priorities, but we still want to know more about. And I'm just kind of wondering, Liza and Amy, what are your thoughts of how we could improve that and see how we could address some of those things without, spending too much time, because it is a lot in such a short time.
That's a great question, Gabby. And I think we're would love to continue to get feedback from all of you on how to improve that process. I mean, we've certainly tried to have that conversation with co-chairs and Bureau management, and get feedback from pub membership at the end of every budget process each year to learn from what did and didn't work, and see what we could do differently. Part of the reason why we kind of centralize the Q&A through pub staff, and that I compile that information and triage that in getting that to the bureaus, is because people are asking questions that are often connected and sometimes similar, but maybe worded slightly different or intending a deeper question. And so I help kind of tease out some of the deeper meaning and organize it in a way that to make it both easier for staff to respond and can provide it in a more structured way back to Pub as a whole, and so that you're getting information not one-off, so that some of you are getting some information but not all of you are getting consistent information. And so that's part of why we collect it and then pass it on and then get it back to all of you together, is to try to streamline it, make it easier for both the bureaus and for you. But we can certainly continue to improve that process. And so certainly would love to continue to have conversations about how to improve that as well. Alex, go ahead.
Thanks. I actually had a question for board members who had been through this process before. I'm wondering if previously this type of prioritization, if you've ever looked back in hindsight and thought, wow, I really wish we had time to look at X, Y, or Z that we didn't get to look at because of the prioritization.
That is a great question, Alex. I'm going to think about that myself for a moment and ask Karen Spencer to go ahead, and then let's circle back to that question.
Yeah, I can't think of an instance where I thought, oh, maybe we should have looked at a different program offer or outside of the prioritization. I've actually really thought the prioritization was a very good process given the number of board members we have, the different interests each board member has. And I feel like we are tackling the programs that have the most significant impact for the bureaus. And I think the bureaus have done a really good job of identifying where there are going to be significant changes to the programs and where there are significant equity impacts with the program. So I would ditto Tom if it were possible, either on this round or a future round, on the climate change piece. If it's our existential crisis of our time, it probably should be front and center in our budget review.
Julia, please go ahead.
I am only participating right now real quick just to agree with the things that folks are saying, just to add that as a data point for you to your question, which is that I agree that the prioritization was helpful and kind of crucial for a group of our size, and that it was done pretty well in the past, and agree about climate change. So anyway, I'm just seconding what people have said. And I've only done this process once, and I was being onboarded as a new pub member and starting a new job. So it's kind of a blur for me, honestly.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of balls in the air to throw budget review on top of that. If I may, I'm not seeing any other hands, so I'm going to try and respond for myself. This is Karen Williams speaking to Alex's question. And I think, and this is just me speaking for something that I would have liked to have maybe vetted a little bit more or spent a little bit more time talking about, is things like, I could broadly say emergency preparedness, more specifically say things like earthquake, resiliency of the system, I guess, to emergencies, to earthquakes. And, not to say that wasn't a topic at all. It obviously was, and it was, among the pub's priorities, certainly, but it didn't, I'm just thinking of, the disappointment when when you vote for your top 3 priorities and maybe 2 of your top 3 don't bubble up to the top. So like, dang, we're just not gonna have time to maybe go into the weeds on some of these things that I would have liked to have heard a little bit more about. Having said that, as Tom pointed out, I mean, there's not always time and space, as we've just discussed, but we should make time and space to make sure that, again, people have the opportunity to ask for information and ask questions about things that aren't necessarily the top 3 or 4, program areas that we end up settling on. Absolutely. But those are my thoughts to Alex's question. And let's see, scanning for hands, and I'm not seeing any. Amy, what more would you like to hear about on process? Maybe we should spend a few minutes on the information that you want to make sure is provided.
Yeah, that would be great. Maybe I should, because I realize now that maybe I should touch briefly on some of the information on the next slide, and then I'll come back to this one, because those 2 questions kind of relate to some of at least what I believe some of the next steps are. So I think I touched on this in the last meeting, but it was like the last 2 seconds when people were starting to drop off. So this first bullet, we kind of already got general support for the program prioritization. So I think the bureaus will initially, at least the initial plan is that some general budget overviews and emerging issues presentations are intended to be coming from the 2 bureaus, from BES and Water Bureau early in January, as they're currently in the process of developing their budgets, and will be submitting their requested budgets by the end of January. So, needing to bring that information to PUB and get feedback before that is submitted. And then, of course, by the end of January, it is when PUB will need to be crafting the initial budget letter, which again is the first of the budget letters. So there will be a later, more detailed recommendation letter once you've dove into all the Q&A and the understanding the requested budget, and really understood and further developed your recommendations. So this first one is typically more of a high level values and themes, and stating some of the stuff that you've already developed a lot of from your work plan, and the values that are pretty consistent from year to year, and that you developed as part of your annual report and work plan this year, or that you have developed through other recommendations that you've been developing through the financial assistance program, or the billing and debt recovery, or other types of recommendations that relate to budget that you've already formalized that you may want to include in that initial budget letter. But there does need to be some discussion that happens in January to kind of finalize that and formalize that into a letter. So that's a lot to do in just a couple meetings, over the next month. And so those are some of those next most immediate key next steps in January. And then it's not here on the slide, but then the pieces that happen after that is that the bureaus submit their requested budget by the end of January. And then in February, is when you're diving deeper into all of those written materials. And then the bureaus will continue to be available, and there's more discussion happening at the meetings in February where there's much more Q&A and diving deeper into the materials that were submitted, follow up on some of the answers that are provided, and you are having discussion that is more of the internal discussion within PUB of you developing the recommendations and some of the talking points that you'll have in preparation for your presentation to council that would happen in March. So that kind of lays out what happens over January, February, and March meetings related to budget. So, so that is kind of what the priorities are in the next couple months. So again, the first step is high-level information from the bureaus, then the detailed materials. So backing up, for those of you who've been through the process, you know a little bit about what information you've seen before, and so you'll expect to see the same kind of information this time. Is there information that you didn't receive that you want to make a request early to say, I'd like to see information in this way, or it would have been nice if we could have had information in a particular way, or made some time in a meeting to cover X, Y, or Z. Or if you're new to the board, ask a question, will we see, something, and we can start to identify, whether we can make space for either creating certain types of materials that would make this process easier for you as we move forward. So any content or materials that will make this process easier for each of you throughout this process. And you don't necessarily have to answer right now in this meeting. I know our time is limited. We only have a few minutes left. I'm available anytime. Give me a call, email me. We can schedule a time to talk. I'd love to chat. I can show you some materials that we've reviewed in the past. We can talk more about budget, answer questions, or talk with you, one-off about what kinds of things might be helpful for you, or what kind of analysis, might be helpful for you. And we can explore that further one-on-one and bring it back to PUB as well, if that's helpful.
Okay, thanks, Amy. Hang on a sec, Tom, is there? Okay, Tom, please go ahead.
Okay, thanks. This is Tom. I just wanted to say, since the whole group or a lot of us are on this call, something that is kind of, I'm having deja vu moments here, or whatever they're called. Something that struck me, and this relates to Alex's question. I am starting to remember that as I was going through, there were a number of places where something would catch my attention, and I would try and see if I could understand it from what the materials that were given to me. And then in the case of BES, I believe Ken, as you showed on that prototype from last year or the year before, there's a contact person. Ken is one of them with BES, or I think he was the only one. And so one would be clarification. Can we actually call that person if we have a question, or do we need to go through Amy and Eliza and you do that? That seems very cumbersome to try and get information as we're going through. But anyway, that's a question. And then the other was that as these things are coming to me now, and I'm thinking, oh yeah, I wish I'd had more time to find out more about that. What that relates to is having good descriptions of what the project is, why the Bureau has responsibility to do that project. And I'm saying this relative to, for instance, the capital highway project that BES is participating in, I think, at around $6 million. And then there are other local improvement district projects where BES is involved, but BES does not pay for the stormwater system. So in terms of understanding either bureau, but in this case, BES's involvement in why are they putting so much money into one project versus other types of projects where they don't put that same contribution in, and what are the reasons for that? And that would, to me, would be very helpful if they could give a little bit more information about why it's their responsibility, to do certain things and how they make their decisions in the description of the project and that type of thing. So Alex, that's a little bit of what I remember from last year.
This is Amy. So in response to your first question, Tom, I understand sometimes it does feel cumbersome. There are some occasions where it's appropriate to call somebody directly, but for the most part, particularly where it relates to this budget season stuff, you're right that on the BES ones, I think Ken is the contact person for all of it. That most of those questions do need to be kind of collected and then passed on to the appropriate people within their bureau. And so it really is most effective and efficient to route those questions through me and Eliza, so that we can collate those, organize them, and get them to the bureaus cohesively, and then make sure, because we also track them, make sure that we get responses and get them back to all of PUB, so that we're not asking the same questions in slightly different ways of multiple people, and that they're getting directed to the right point of contact within the bureaus. Sometimes it depends on the type of question, so it varies. And so, if it is appropriate for something to be asked directly of them, we will let you know. But for the most part, it's most efficient to start with us.
And this is Karen Williams, and may I ask a follow-up of Gabby, because this discussion just makes me think about the suggestion you made, Gabby. And were you looking for some kind of compilation of the kinds of questions that we PUB members are asking, like during our reviews, as we are sort of poring over these documents at home, and we're sending questions to Amy, Eliza, or just coming up with questions? Is that the kind of compilation that you were looking for, Gabby, or have I misunderstood what you were suggesting?
Yeah, yes. I think for me, what would be helpful to know is how many other people are asking the same questions. Like, this seems of particular interest to other PUB members. Like, if I ask something, then other people know I already asked it. So they're like, oh, well, I'll just kind of ditto it. Or like we can make, like, if it's like a Google Doc or some other kind of document where we could say, okay, like I agree, like I want to look into this as well. So that folks kind of just know what we're asking and to see what interests there are. And like, if it sounds like it's something that is more streamlined, like having a compilation of our questions, and even if it's for questions that are outside, the main priorities that we settle on, that we can see like how many people are interested on the other things, like to also kind of prioritize that as well, or just see kind of the affinity that the group has for specific questions. I think something like that would help me see like where we are at as a body.
Thank you so much for that clarification or additional explanation. That was really helpful for me. And can I put this to Amy and Eliza both? I know we've had some conversations about the, let's see, troubles with Google Docs and accidental deliberation. Can we think about that a little bit more? I mean, is there a document that we could perhaps, enter into, but, not, I don't know, enter our question into, but not necessarily opine on anything? Looks like Gabby has an idea there.
Yeah, I think it doesn't need to be something we are actively working. I just suggested that, like, it could be just something that Amy and Eliza share back. Like, this is how many people ask similar questions or something like that. It could be any type of that, something that could just be shared out regularly. So
Okay.
it doesn't have to be a particular, like,
Yeah, I can certainly share the questions once we've compiled them. I hear what you're asking, Gabby. I think the one caution with that is that I think sometimes even in meetings, I hear, kind of versions of questions from multiple people. And so we're not always tracking like how many people ask a question because it's asked in slightly different ways. So I think often, it may be asked by 5 people, but it's only written down once. And so, it may actually, or only one person asked it, but really 7 people are wondering it. And so it may not actually be reflected that everybody's asking, but, it's only captured once. The one thing that I would say from that, that I like about getting the questions, even though they're repeated questions from many of you, is that I have noticed over the years that you each ask questions in different ways. And often there's like multiple components of questions. And so one question can kind of turn into 3, and they get much deeper because several of you have asked it. So, like if you, Gabby, may have just said, ditto, I want to hear that, but instead I had received a question written by you, Gabby, I actually would have written the question slightly differently because of the language that you personally use, and the answer might have gotten deeper because of it. And so that I think there can be value in that. And so I just say that personally, I have seen that over the years, just from the different perspectives that we have on the pub. And there's huge value to that because of those of you who serve on the board, and the way in which you ask questions, and so that has added value to the conversation, I think. So.
Okay, so for the time being, as we're getting close to close here, if you have additional thoughts, additional ideas, additional requests related to kind of more budget process, not so much in the weeds type questions, and thoughts and opinions, please send those to Amy and Eliza so we can be prepared for come January. Have a good process in place. Karen, I'm sorry, Eliza, I believe Karen Spencer was going to do an ARC report back in our final moments here.
Yeah, and then I was going to give a brief preview of next week so people will know where we're going.
Karen, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. So I attended the ARC session not too long ago, let's just say that. It seems like it was about a week or 2 ago. There were 3 different appeals that occurred. Generally, they all 3 related to unexpected water usage, very high bills. If one individual could not ascertain why their water bill suddenly had increased dramatically without any changes in the household. Another was a new tenant to a building, and submitted extensive information about the fact that there were barely any residents actually at the building during the time. And then the third was a business in which they'd had a leaky toilet, and about a year ago, a little less than a year ago, they had another situation very similar to that, and they wanted relief from that on their water bill. One thing that has come up repeatedly in our ARC discussions is the fact that people are billed every 3 months. So they can suddenly end up with a $1,000 water bill when they're used to paying, let's say, $150 or something like that. And it particularly in the middle of a pandemic, is causing economic hardship. And I would love to have the Bureau talk a little bit about why, at least for residential customers, we can't move to the monthly billing, because I think that would really help. And essentially, for 2 of the cases, we were able to provide some relief from the high water bills. For the commercial contacts, we were not, there's basically a rule, basically says you can't get relief more than once in a 12-month period. And there just didn't seem to be any justification for why we would provide any relief from that rule at all. So we did not in the commercial context. And I'm happy to answer any questions anybody may have about that.
All right, thanks for that report, Karen. Does anyone have any questions for Karen on what she presented? Okay, well, let's note that.
This is Eliza, and that report back was a perfect segue to the topic for next Thursday. So reminder that this is one of those months where we have back-to-back meetings or back-to-back weeks. And I have sent out a couple times now the draft on your debt recovery, billing, and financial assistance recommendations. And one of the board members in one of your meetings in the past some months actually put as a recommendation to auto enroll residential customers in monthly billing. So that's literally one of the recommendations that you may want to make. It's on the list. And so it's a big list. If you haven't opened that document yet, it is big. And I really, really encourage you. It'll go out as read ahead again this Thursday. I haven't gotten any feedback yet. And so it's likely to not have your feedback in it yet. But I really encourage you to take a look at it ahead of time. And if you do take the time to mark, yes, I know I agree with this one. No, I know I don't agree with this one, or to decide I need to discuss it, or I'm okay with this either way. I pass, I defer to everybody else on the board. If you do actually use those columns before the meeting, feel free to send them to me next week. I'll do my best to collate that before we go into the meeting. I just won't have had it gotten out to you as read ahead yet. And so our goal at next week's meeting will be to walk through, it's 30 some potential recommendations. Some of them are very simple, some are more complicated, and kind of find where we'll probably do a bunch of straw polling to find where there's agreement. And if we get far enough in walking through those and we get through them all, then that would be the point where you might take a formal vote to go with the straw polls or something like that. So I expect it to be a discussion heavy meeting and to kind of use the principle that Karen Williams mentioned earlier about like the weight principle. Why am I talking? Why am I not talking? To think and say, am I adding something? Or am I essentially just agreeing? And so I don't need to add, so that we can make some progress on those recommendations. They're pretty rich. And like I shared, I literally did pull out implicit and explicit recommendations from going back till about, I think about a year, but really focusing on the last 6 months. And if there's any questions about that, you can ask me now.
I don't have a question, Eliza, but thank you so much for pulling together a voluminous array of really, really dense stuff. And thank you for organizing that in a way that we can process it. All right. I don't think we have missed anything. Just again, reiterating what Eliza said, our third Thursday meeting is next week. So I hope to see many of you in about 10 days or so. And yeah, give a good read to the read ahead material and really come prepared to have some good discussion and good conversations. And I do think that the deliberations that we have about the debt recovery and related topical matter is really going to help inform the budget priorities document that we're going to want to be putting together in January. I think that's going to feed really nicely into that. So we'll get, it'll be a lot of work, but I think it'll be work we get to use in, a couple of different settings. So if there's nothing else, meeting adjourned. Thank you all very much. And we'll see you next week.
Thank you.